Yes, hello. For those of you who know me, um, you may have known that I have disappeared a little bit on the social media scene. For those who don't, my name is Josh Cameron. I'm a native Utahn. I have grown up playing video games pretty much my entire life. In many ways, games have provided me a solace, I guess, to kind of help, and sure, in some ways, to detach from the world, but also to get real life skills, how to examine a problem from a creative point of view, how to succeed and overcome through perseverance, right? Mainly, how can you wipe and wipe and wipe and wipe and wipe and wipe and kind of stick to it. There's a certain amount of delayed gratification, even with the immediate gratification built in. So perhaps a certain amount of training for delayed gratification, which is a huge marker for success. And I think that I, as a 40-year-old man who has spent the most of my life playing video games in one form or another, whether it be learning assessments or Sega Master System when I believe it came out in '88. So I was 8 when when we got it, and so even before that, the Atari, right, what 2600, I believe, and all the way up to Genesis. I played the Saturn, the N64, GameCube, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4, uh, uh, Xbox. I the original was just Xbox 360, right? Xbox One. So by no means am I perhaps any sort of like master or end all be all of like what video games can house, but I find that I have an interesting way of looking at the world. I seek it through philosophy. I try to advance my knowledge on a given subject, and that often will guide me through life and change, um, kind of change the way in which I view the world, but also the way in which I value either the world itself or value what I bring to the world. And that doesn't always happen in the moment, right? We need time to evolve. And I have found now in April, nearly May of 2021, that a lot of what I've come to understand and come to know not only takes years and years to compile and introspect to become better, but it also allows me to change through feedback for myself, through introspection. It allows me to change through feedback from external, exogenous, if you will, sources, to help guide me in ways where maybe I need to question more than be completely, you know positive that I know an answer, right? That I just am so definitive that I know what the answer is. Say politics, for instance, right? Here's an easy straw man to make the argument, right? Many people might say that that socialism or democratic socialism, works better than we've allowed it to work, um, but we just haven't implemented it right. Right? If only you give me the chance to implement it, me with all my vast experience of like zero in any sort of legislative capacity. Granted, I've certainly have worked in state facilities and have navigated certain political bodies within the careers that I've had, but not, by no means have I actually had any sort of government experience. So if I say that it's not been done right, perhaps I'm reading a case study, perhaps I'm building upon a certain amount of evidence from somebody else that I've read and educated myself on, but by no means am I a master at it, because you have to have a practical application with theoretical knowledge in order to be any sort of master. And in order to master, you have to make a lot of mistakes. And in a world where you're canceled for a mistake, there really is no hunger for a master. And so the only way to really, I guess, succeed in a place to become a master where the world demands that you can't be a master is to, in some way, separate yourself from the world and integrate yourself in a different capacity. And that kind of brings me back to my original point as far as uh, disengaging from social media. Right? There's been Netflix documentaries, just detailing how social media makes you, less happy. Social media is a very much amped up almost drug, if you will, of the mainstream media. Right, we all know that the mainstream media really just propagates their own narrative. All right, certainly there's truth that is sprinkled within, but ultimately it's how can I get you enraged and incensed over red Starbucks cups that don't honor Santa Claus, or how can I get you thinking that Russia is going to freeze, your turn off all the heat in America and hack the electrical grid. And that might seem like, what are you talking about, Josh? I have no idea what you're talking about. Currently, right now, we have old white people who got canceled, say Bill O'Reilly, because he was a disgusting, perverted, person. But then we have people who have kind of joined that perversion of truth. Maybe not in the same way that he like groped people and like was just this nasty old man. But Rachel Maddow has stepped into the sector, just kind of making up stuff in order to drive hate, in order to drive views, in order to drive money. And it's sad to see people who push like this Russia narrative and not have any sort of evidence to support it. And it's just, well, haven't you seen? Haven't you seen? What about all this? What about all this the circumstantial evidence? What about the fact that the DNC never allowed the FBI to, actually examine their servers to actually prove that there was any sort of hacking? Because this was a narrative that WikiLeaks showed that was actually constructed by the Clinton administration, or rather hoping to be the Clinton administration. And why did they do that? Because they can't abide the fact that they failed to like this carnival barker buffoon. That really any sort of, say, gamer who has any sort of analytical ability can really sniff out like, hey, this guy is obviously a representation of an idea rather than like a holistic person, right? This is a character or even a caricature, right, removed from a whole person, because there's no way that Donald Trump is in any way a sincere person, right? He's authentic. He's an authentic a-hole, right? He's an authentic destructive person. He's authentically, kind of his head up his fourth point of contact and so far removed that he thinks that $1 million loan from his father, from his daddy, is something small that really any American should be able to come by. But pre-pandemic, the average American was a $400 emergency away from bankruptcy. And so let's say that you live in this hellscape of $400 emergency away from bankruptcy, and the only solace you have, right? I come back to video games were a solace of mine. Say you play online games, right? I have suffered an acute amount of stress in the beginning of 2021 and still in many ways currently. And I have found solace kind of taking root in my gaming. I bought a World of Warcraft account again, paying monthly, and joining that community. I realized that there's something magical there that really is not actualized, but should be actualized in IRL, right, in real life. In the idea that, as I'm playing, I mean, many of you may not necessarily be that aware or familiar with World of Warcraft, but effectively end game content, right? You build up your character, start at level 1, you eventually get to max level, which is 60. Then you start getting all the best gear. So you hit harder, you can take better hits, you can survive. And say you've got a dungeon that requires 5 people, right? So then you have a 5-person assignment where one person's assigned to get hit and hold and make everyone pissed at them, so they get hate, and that hate then gets all those mobs or creatures or ads to then punch that guy, and that's called the tank. Well, then you have the healer, right? That keeps the tank alive, because if you're going to get punched, chances are you're going to need some sort of mitigation factor, which is certainly built in, but not to survive a dungeon by yourself. So you have your healer keep you alive, and then you have your DPS that are damage per second that are going to help annihilate those ads and help you advance, right? Advance throughout the dungeon. And if your healing is not up to par, eventually your DPS are going to take some sort of ground effect damage, some area of effect damage. And if they're struggling to keep the tank alive as is, they're probably not going to keep the DPS alive. If they can't keep the DPS alive, well, then the DPS not going to be able to take down the ads or the boss as quickly, which is going to put even further stress on the healer that's barely able to keep up with the keeping the tank alive. And so everyone needs to be at least moderately good at what they do in order to succeed. And you find people who have just outrageous gear and they go into lower level dungeons in order to help out usually people within their own community. Now, within World of Warcraft, that community is typically called a guild, right? So the guild I'm in is called Stormbringers. I'm on the Azure Mist. I'll let you figure out my screen name. Maybe I'll keep it a secret. Maybe I'll reveal it. I don't know. And so with that, you'll find that within your community, you'll have people who have gear that is 5 times greater than they would need, but then they'll go and help other guildies, right? People within your guild, their friends, or even just random people that don't even know they just happen to be in the guild. They'll spend their time, right? What's the most precious commodity you have when playing a video game, right? It's your time, especially if it takes time to build your character up to max level. It takes time to amass great gear. It takes time, and it takes a lot of failure, right? And then it takes a lot of trying and get after it, and perseverance in order to get the best gear. And then that person's then giving their time over to people who haven't spent as much time, who haven't amassed as many resources, who are then helping them advance through these lower dungeons, also knowing that while they are in some ways being altruistic, there's also kind of a unspoken arrangement that when you get better gear, you're then going to help me, right? Yeah, I'm helping you now, and I may not need any of the gear, so I might be able to float all the gear to you as we're going through these lower dungeons. But at some point, you're going to get enough gear to advance beyond that, and perhaps even catch up to me, or this other person that's rewarding their time to their guild mates and friends. And I realize that this is such a healthy way to look at life, right? Often as an American, is what's in it for me? Maybe that person will actually help you later on. How? Well, if they make more money, they're going to pay more taxes. If they pay more taxes, it's going to go towards schools. If it goes towards schools and you have a dilapidated school and your school has more funds, well, chances are it's at least going to, at least superficially, help advance a better material condition than dilapidation. Granted, there might be politics involved where there's politicians like stealing money, and maybe that's the reason for the dilapidation. But ultimately, if you are trying to make your community better, you're most likely going to have some sort of feedback loop that's then going to help advance your community. If you have an arrangement where you can work in concert, and you perhaps it's more in taxes, understanding that it helps pave roads, it helps for schools, but then having taxes up front helps us with managing a budget, because then we have less upfront costs, right? For instance, say healthcare, right? Say you get in a car accident and then all of a sudden you go to the ER, that's a $1,500 bill. And then say you severely break your leg, say your femur has a compound fracture, so it actually penetrates the skin. There might be a risk of infection because of that, right? Because now you have an exposed wound, and you've got a broken bone that poked through. So then it's not just a matter of an infection in your blood or your tissue, but then your bone's exposed too. So then you have to spend several days in the hospital. Okay, so then you leave with a $15,000 bill. And if you were a $400 emergency away from bankruptcy, I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to pay $15,000? Well, you just simply don't have the ability. So what happens when you don't have the ability? Chances are you're going to file for medical bankruptcy. Well, what happens then? Well, medical bankruptcy says, okay, well, you are no longer relieved of this, or you are no longer in obligation of this debt. You're relieved of this debt. But this debt is now going to be folded back into everyone else that pays healthcare premiums. And so we can pay that debt off the backs of other people who are struggling also at a $400 emergency. And then what happens if they wind up in the same situation? Same thing, right? So it just makes anyone who pays healthcare premiums just makes their situation worse and worse and worse by having others just like, what's in it for me to help them, right? Well, maybe I'll pay less in healthcare premiums, or maybe I won't even have healthcare premiums, and I'll actually be paid by a tax in sort of some sort of universal healthcare system. Whether that be Medicare for all, or whether that be some sort of Canadian or uh, Great Britain style, healthcare system. But the point is if you know what's going to be, what portion of that is going to come out of your taxes, then you're going to be able to budget for it because it's happening right every month. And so what happens if you have that exact same scenario with that compound fracture and you have a universal healthcare system? Well, yeah, it sucks that you were laid up in the hospital. Hopefully that doesn't compromise your job. But when you're out, all right, bro, take care. What's my bill? You already paid it. You already paid your debt to society. You paid your taxes. You're a freaking patriot. You're a patriot because you're advancing the material conditions based upon your precious commodity to help not only yourself but also your community. And understanding this community mindedness is really a healthy state of affairs, and it's something that's really built in and ingrained in gamers. And sure, certainly there's toxic environments, there's toxic trolls, but quick anecdote. When I was first leveling my druid in Shadowlands, which is the current World of Warcraft expansion, I was doing a battlegrounds for some conquest and honor, and I what was it, Twin Peaks, I believe. And so I'm a druid, so of course I'm going to grab the flag, and of course I'm going to run it across. And there was another druid that's having a hard time, went and grabbed the flag. I wasn't necessarily monitoring what he was doing, but I see in the general chat he's complaining about how nobody's healing him, and then he dies. And I just happen to run in. I grab the flag. I am looking to see where my teammates are on the field. I run towards those teammates. I get slowed. I'm a druid, so I just I shapeshift out of my slow and shapeshift back into travel form, bounce out of there. And since I'm running towards my teammates, they're like, "Hey, that guy needs help." The point of this is a community mindedness that if I help the community, will either A, not die because we're getting DPS down by the enemy, or B, we'll be able to score the necessary 3 points that we need of returning a flag 3 times in order to then win the game. And so since I understood the rules of the game, worked within this community mindedness, here's this guy who was complaining, and nobody really said anything to him. Nobody really responded. I scored because, again, I understood the rules. I had played within the community. I scored, and the guy then tipped his hat and said, I bow to your skills. To which I responded, dude, it wasn't me. I got healed like 4 times. I would have died. Like I would have died halfway up the field. It wasn't me, right? I certainly understood how I could advance my ability to score, but it wasn't me. It was everyone. It was everyone coming around and helping me out and circling the wagons for their teammate. And so I said that, hey, it wasn't me. It was everyone healed me. I would have died long before I was able to score. And then somebody else replied, hey, look at that, positive reinforcement. And there's such a hunger for positive reinforcement. And certainly there's a reason, that we have a stick, right? And certainly there's a case for, hitting somebody with a stick. But most likely you are going to catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And you are going to be able to convince somebody that you really are on their side and that you really do want to help if you are utilizing a positive reinforcement mechanism as opposed to like browbeating them. And there's a lot of wisdom that we can gain from counterintuitive sources. Behind me, you probably don't even recognize unless you watch anime. That's Cowboy Bebop. And what is counterintuitive about this? Well, let's see. This guy here, right? This guy's got a heart of gold. You wouldn't think it. He's a bounty hunter, right? He's there to make cash. He's there to propagate off of some poor dude went and maybe he actually was poor. Maybe crime caused him to, or rather poverty caused him to report the crime, and then crime then gets a bounty on his head. But there's a lot of times where this guy with his heart of gold really does make his life much worse, but really shows you the power of the human condition, where the acute pains actually kind of help his community. They end up unraveling a lot of mysteries. They arrive with different allies, right? These allies aren't all who started, right? First it's these two. And then counterintuitive sources, right? They talk about how a corgi is like the most common dog that nobody likes. Nobody wants anything to do with a corgi, and it's the most brilliant being in the world, basically, because it's got some sort of, I want to say AI. It's been a while since I've watched it. I'm a big fan of the of not just the movie but the series as well. I wish there was more of it, but and then this silly kid here really helps with communicating with the dog, again counterintuitively, and being brilliant and hacking systems that allow them to continue feeding right now their family and their community in ways in which they work harmoniously together, and certainly they'll bicker, but ultimately that community advancement, I really find that if you look towards how can I help my community, that's going to push you in a capacity where you're going to make positive moralistic choices. That's not necessarily going to be the best one. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have acute pain. Doesn't mean it's going to save you from stress in your life. And in fact, being a moral person is probably going to make it more stressful. But it's probably going to make you it's going to make you have a harder life, but you'll most likely feel a better sense of gratitude, right? You'll most likely feel a better sense of, again, community involvement. And the more that you understand who you are and the more that you push towards kind of advancing how do I look at myself in the mirror and smile? Right? Like whatever that is, right? Whatever that is for you. How do I look in the mirror and then smile and like truly smile? Not like, hey, I just, I'm dating a girl and now we're canoodling. And so that canoodling then makes me feel happy because I have, dopamine and oxytocin popping in my brain. But like moralistically, like, am I a good person? Right? What does it mean to be a good person? Right? Do I open the door for people who I work for? Right? Go to work, open the door. What a nice guy I am. Right? There's an old person, and I let them onto the elevator, knowing that there's a limited amount of people who can get on an elevator, say given COVID restrictions, and then I wait. What a good person I am. Meanwhile, I vote for people who drop bombs on poor brown countries, steal their natural resources, and then I talk about how if anyone messes with us, we'll just turn them into a glass parking lot because nuclear warheads. I mean, does that sound like the language of a good person? Right? Many people follow an idea of Christian indoctrination. Right? Is this something that if there is a God that has a coming to Jesus moment after you die, do you think that they are going to judge somebody as nice or moralistic who just talks about if you mess with me, I'm going to turn you to a glass parking lot? All right, and the idea of a glass parking lot, if you're not familiar, just means like a nuclear bomb hitting sand, right? Where's sand? The Middle East, right? So what are they inferring? Right, blowing up the Middle East, and then it's turning into a glass parking lot. And gamers, right? Say people who even just play hack and slash, right? They play God of War. Well, what does God of War force you to do? It forces you to do puzzles, right? And many of these puzzles are going to be, pattern recognition. And does it pass the sniff test that this is a congruent pattern, that it is congruent with a moralistic, I'm a good person, and then now I'm going to use what power I have to push a power structure to create a glass parking lot. Million murders, murder millions of people, right? And what a good person I am. And so I think that we just don't value thinking about thought, right? Because there's no money to be made. There's no money to be made about taking a step back and like, am I responding rationally? There's a lot of money to be made about making you irrational, making you hate somebody else simply because they wear a blue shirt or a red shirt, right? Sectarian politics, right? That's insane that America is now as sectarian as Iran, basically. That if you're a Republican, then Democrats hate you simply because you say you're a Republican. Or if you're a Democrat, then Republicans hate you simply because they say you're a Democrat. Like, I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm not even going to investigate who that is. I'm just going to assume, based upon your palette, right, your color palette of choice, like that you're a bad person. Are you kidding me? And then if you cross an imaginary border across Canada, well, then the Canadian Conservatives are blue. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean that they're evil because they're blue? Because they chose that color too? And so, I mean, there's very easy ways to pick apart a lot of really dumb things that are said today. And I think that if you find yourself wanting to play video games, you find yourself playing a lot of video games, and you really take a lot of enjoyment there. I'm not going to say that's necessarily the best thing that you should be doing, nor will I say that it is what you should be doing. But the thing is there's valuable tools that you can gain, right? And not just political understanding and pattern recognition, but let's go back to World of Warcraft. If you are tanking anything above right now a mythic 9, so say a 10 or above, and might be foreign to people who don't understand the game, but when you coming back to that 5-man dungeon aspect where you've got the tank, 3 DPS, and a healer. Well, in order to defeat the dungeon, you've got a list of bosses that are there. Usually there's 3 or 4. Within that, right, in order to reach a boss, you have to basically bulldoze your way through a bunch of different creatures. And within that, there's a certain amount that will add up to 100%. So even if you kill all the bosses, that if you don't have 100% kill count, then you didn't defeat the dungeon. Even if you have 100% kill count and you didn't defeat all the bosses, well, then you don't have 100% completion. So you have to have both. And so as you are pushing through, and you get to every 20%, well, then you get a pride spawn. And a pride spawn is basically there's this vampire dude who says like, oh, you think that you're so cool. Yeah, look at you. You just killed 1/5 of the dungeon. Well, now I'm going to have the special ad that's going to be kind of hard, right? The longer he lives, the more damage he does. People don't want to blow any sort of like big damage cooldowns, because as soon as you kill him, then he infuses you with this power. So if you have anything that might be on a 2-minute or a 3-minute cooldown that significantly increases your ability to deal damage, well, then you actually want to save it till he's dead. So it can be a little bit of a struggle to bring him down. Well, then if you don't know the proper route, you might actually pull a giant pack when you have 19 or 39 or 59% count. So as soon as you kill one guy out of 4, then a pride spawns, who's already hard to deal with anyway. And then you have 4 other guys that you have to deal with. And then maybe there's bolstering. And so bolstering means that as soon as you kill one guy, it makes another guy 20% stronger. Like, so now you have this big mob, and everything that you kill is like making the other guys harder. So then you're getting smacked. And so not understanding the route can lead to failing your key, failing your mythic dungeon. And so how do you then get a proper route? Well, maybe you can follow and hope for the best, right? Maybe you can hope that your tank knows what they're doing, or maybe you can tank it yourself. Maybe you can be the tank. Okay, so now you're tanking it yourself, and then what are you going to do? Are you just going to do what everyone showed you? That may or may not lead to a successful, completion of your key or completion of your mythic dungeon, or are you actually going to investigate? Hey, what route should I take, and how do you do that? Well, if you get your add-ons, whereas an add-on is basically just an app for the game. So you get an add-on that's Mythic Dungeon Tools. And so Mythic Dungeon Tools will actually help you figure out your route. You can click on a group of ads or an individual ad, whichever the case may be. It'll show you how much of that kill count is. So you can figure out exactly, how do I get to a point where I can summon Pride? So we kill Pride just by itself. It's not going to compromise our ability to advance our way into the key. In fact, we're actually going to get the best route possible and skip maybe hard packs, right? Maybe there's a giant pack that just sucks to fight because of bolstering, because it's so big that by the time you get to the last guy, he's just gigantic and he just smashes you. So maybe you want to actually go for, individual mobs that are in themselves much harder to kill, but they don't have any sort of bolstering effect because they're just one. And so understanding how to navigate that, right, using this tool to critique your understanding, your current understanding of the dungeon, it allows you to then carve out a strategic path in order to advance your own condition and advance the condition of your community, which is, again, the rest of, I guess, your family, right, your family here in this case. And then you can look and see, all right, are we on track? Have we killed the right people? And let's say somebody, walks over and gets proximity aggro, or they get too close to a group that you aren't supposed to kill, right? You can quickly open up. It may not be that easy, right? But if you are familiar with how to use the tool, you can quickly open up and be like, okay, so this is how much additional that we got. Click on that group that you just pulled. Okay, so that just gave us 4 additional points of kill. Can I remove 4 additional points? So say in the case of necrotic wake, for anyone who's familiar with that, if you get up to the third boss, you're basically getting about 30% of your count in that area because of the ads that currently are there, the ads that the mini bosses that summon that start the third boss, and then just the groups that summon after that as well. And if you show up and you have too much count, you can actually summon Pride not only mid pack, but then as you're trying to kill him, then another pack is going to spawn and you're going to annihilate. And so it can be incredibly difficult, and you can basically ensure defeat by just haphazardly rushing, through circumstances, and haphazardly rushing through, I don't know, maybe a ballot box too. Maybe you can actually make your material conditions worse because you don't actually know who is the lesser of two evils. You just assume that somebody who has a blue name or red name is evil. Then you're going to then continue just through sheer propaganda, rushing through, bumbling through, not analyzing, is there actually a way that I can ensure success and mitigate defeat? Maybe there is. I know there is, right? I don't necessarily know that I'm going to be able to give you the answers on how to do it within your own life ability, capacity, aptitude, because I simply don't know the struggles that you're up against. But I think that the first thing to do is how do you examine presupposed ideas and figure out that answer yourself, right? And maybe I can help you with that. But like when you react to something, somebody criticizes your work and you immediately get defensive. I mean, was it justified? Were they, rude just for the sake of being rude, or was there something legitimate there? Did they actually do you a favor by giving you feedback? And certainly, maybe they could have been a little bit, nicer about it, but maybe they did you a favor and taking that feedback, right? If I suck as a tank and my route sucks and I murder my group over and over and over, and somebody's like, bro, you suck. Yeah, that's gonna hurt my feelings, and maybe I'll get defensive, but like, maybe he's right. Or like, dude, like terrible route, or like, where'd you get this route, bro? Right. And so there's certain feedback and wisdom there. Yeah, it's snarky. Yeah, I don't want to listen to it, but is there wisdom there? So start with that. Is there wisdom in criticism? Assuredly there is, because somebody criticizing you is gonna show you something that you probably don't want to look at yourself, right? And doesn't necessarily mean that you then need to change it, but there's value in sniffing that out, and there's value in questioning, hey, why did I act that way? Why was I defensive? Were they right? Do I suck as a tank? Maybe I do, right? How do I get better? Oh, maybe mythic dungeon tools, right? Maybe I can get, DBM, right? Deadly boss mods that will then, if I'm about to do something stupid by standing there when there's a ground effect that's going to blow me up, it'll air horn and give me like this, this noise that is just simply, I just can't ignore because of how loud and obnoxious it is. It's like, oh, thanks for the reminder, DBM. And so how do we set ourselves up for success? Well, first by examining, why do we act the way that we act, right? Have we found that we are acting within our own best interests, or do we find that we undermine ourselves all the time? Do we find that we feel really good about our skill level, but we have a bad way of advocating for ourselves, right? And so why is that? And I think that if you start to sniff that out and you start to examine it in the exact same way that you examine your route, right? That I just laid out, examining a route of how do I examine my route for success? Not just for me. Maybe I want to get KSM, which I do, right? I've got a bunch of 14s, and so I want to get KSM. I don't really care about the mount. I'm a druid. Like I care about a mount. But it's cool. And then not only that, but it then extends to all my alts, so then I can upgrade all my gear to max level, which again may not necessarily make a lot of sense to people who aren't all that familiar with World of Warcraft, but take it from me, it's a decently easy thing, and if it was, or a decently good thing, and if it was easy, then everyone would have it, and most people don't. Um, and so, how do I mitigate failure while optimizing success? Right. And so now I'm going to share with you a powerful quote. I don't know if I can say a favorite quote. I'm just such a nerd, especially a philosophy nerd, that there's really no way for me to pinpoint like a favorite quote. But philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein: philosophy is the battle against the bewitchment of our minds by use of language. Right. And if you play World of Warcraft, if you think that uh, you're a human, and then you run into an orc who's a different a different faction, you can then, if you are war mode enabled, you can then fight them and possibly gank them, right? Maybe they're just trying to do some quest, kill some quest, someone in their quest line. They're like, yes, I'm about to get my, and then they get murdered because somebody came up and just wiped them out. So you can figure out ways to make your life more painful, put more obstacles in there, make other people's lives more painful, and and put more obstacles in there. And you can think that, hey, I'm a human and they're an orc, so I should kill them. Hey, I'm a Republican and they're a Democrat, so like they're not patriotic and they're just a terrible person and they should just leave the country because only I care about the country. We can think in these simplistic ways and to our own detriment, and that's probably going to seal our fate as far as ensuring failure, because chances are somebody who thinks differently than you, who has a different political persuasion, really does actually have your best interest in mind. And chances are somebody who says that they care about you is a complete con man, or a con woman, and is going to totally take advantage of you. And if you don't have any ability to think about thought, that's all philosophy is think about thought. Why? Right, the meta thought. Why is it I thought that? Not just I thought that. Why did I think that? Okay, well, what then? What after why did I think that? And that maybe I understood that. Okay, well, I thought that because this is the type of person I am. Well, why is this the type of person I am? Well, okay, well, maybe I was raised that way. Well, why was I raised that way? Well, maybe because we were poor, we didn't really have the ability to to have a lot of patience. We snapped at each other. Okay, well, am I poor now? Well, maybe I'm not in the best conditions, but poor, probably not abject poverty. But okay, well, do I need to examine that survival instinct that helped me through that situation? Surely, but is that maybe now a hindrance? Something that helped me then? Am I now at a evolutionary stage where I don't need a tail anymore? Right, swinging through the trees with a tail was great, but now I'm walking upright. I don't swing through trees, so maybe I don't need that. What I use, that survival instinct, maybe I don't need it anymore, and I can do things differently in a more advanced capacity. And sniffing out our own BS, right? That's going to be first and foremost. That's going to be number one. And so that's why I really don't want to come to you with a bunch of answers. I'd really like to come with a bunch of questions. And I think video games are going to be a great way to provide a kind of an analytical thought experiment, especially in the way in which community arranges itself in today's society. And I think that if you do find yourself playing games, that there's real strengths that you can gain, and that if you lean into those, you can really lead yourself to success. And I'll leave it at that. I've been going on for about 40 minutes. This is just kind of impromptu, from the cuff. Right? These are thoughts that I think of all the time. I really just I try to figure out how I can help myself, so that I can also like serve my community in whatever capacity that I can. I've certainly done things that I'm not necessarily the most proud of, but I'm not necessarily embarrassed of either. And if you look up, Joshua Cameron, Salt Lake, you'll certainly see what I'm talking about, especially if you look up the newspapers, Deseret News or Salt Lake Tribune, right? There's a lot of me protesting, which is certainly I definitely love that I showed up, especially the Old Glory, right? The American flag. But there may have been times where perhaps I yelled at where I shouldn't have. Perhaps I offended people that were fully appreciating like what I was saying, or I was just so stuck on like I know the answer to this that I just really didn't even comprehend that that somebody else could actually make my argument stronger or better. And so I try to again be at least introspective as time goes on, even if I do also have the ability to blind myself in the moment. And I think that's most important, right? It's not that you always do things right, but that you have the ability to examine your situation and examine, did I do it right? And if not, how do I maybe do it more correct, if not actually correct, assuming there's some sort of, absolution to that correctness in the future. Anyway, thanks for listening. I plan on coming out with these fairly regularly. Again, I'm a philosophy nerd. I'll try to talk about some of my advancements in the dungeon, some of my struggles within World of Warcraft, as well as with life, and see if I can maybe have a meaningful conversation that helps others, kind of within their own stresses and within their own confines of 2021 pandemic Earth. I like that, pandemic Earth. All right, guys, I shall bid you adieu.